Hello and welcome to the Columbia Daily Tribune's Behind the Stripes football webcast. This is Tribune sports editor Joe Waljasper along with Tribune football beat writer David Morrison. David, we're back from Gainesville, Florida, where Missouri beat the Gators 42-13 in a game whose score would indicate a dominant offensive performance, but in actuality, Missouri gains 119 total yards, including just 20 in the air, but get 6 turnovers, 2 of which are returned for touchdowns, 2 special teams touchdowns by Marcus Murphy, and sort of probably figuratively, if not literally, end the Florida career of Will Muschamp. If you could put into words maybe what emotion that Missouri should feel after such a victory, I would be curious, because just getting feedback from fans, it seems like perhaps 3/4 of them were enraged by the horrible offense to the point they couldn't enjoy it whatsoever. And maybe 1/4 of them had varying opinions about just enjoy it while it lasts. I mean, what did you take away from that game?
I would say confused and optimistic would be kind of the two. Well, maybe not optimistic.
Confusedly optimistic?
Confusedly pleased, maybe, would be if I could encapsulate it in one little phrase there. Because, like you said, it was the weirdest game I've ever seen. They had 320 return yards in the game, and so they almost, they outgained their offense by a factor of 3 in just interception, kickoff, punt, and fumble returns. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not a big city lawyer, not a statistician, but I don't know that anybody's ever done that. Like I don't know, maybe back in 1912 when Grantland Rice was coach or writing and the Four Horsemen. Anyway, but yeah, it was weird. It's so weird that I can't really put it into words. So if I'm a Missouri fan, I'm looking at that and I'm saying, okay, well, this was a good bounce back win on the road in a tough place to play against a team that was presumably one of the top 3 or 4 favorites for the SEC East, but also all the same problems that were there before, they're still there. It was good in that they saw that when their defense plays well against good offensive teams, they can kind of neutralize them, and when their defense plays well against bad offensive teams like Florida, they can become a force for the offense, basically, the Missouri offense. So, I mean, I guess that was encouraging, but then you look at the offense and, I don't really buy what Gary Pinkel said, where it's on me, I shut it down, because it was really going quite poorly before he would have shut it down anyway. So, I don't know, if it could be encapsulated in a facial expression, maybe it's kind of like that's all I got.
I would liken it to like the feeling, like if you're on the swing as a kid and you're going ever higher, and then you jump out. It's probably that feeling while you're still in the air, thinking this is a lot of fun, right before you land and break both of your ankles, maybe. Because you continue to play that way. There's not many teams on their schedule. They don't play a lot of. There's not really any good teams left on their schedule, but I don't think you're going to run into anyone who is so spectacularly bad as Florida was that night. Give all the credit to Missouri's defense for doing a great job. Give all the credit to Marcus Murphy, who deserves it because he's a fantastic returner. He had that punt return really on a play where they weren't even really blocking for a punt return. It was all him. So give those guys a lot of credit. But I think you also have to acknowledge, as you're watching a game, if you watched any football, what you saw out of Florida was football at its lowest level, and it was a quarterback whose confidence was so ruined that there was no way he was going to do anything right. And it seemed to me almost cruel that he was left in the game for as long as he was. Right. Nothing good was going to happen to that poor guy, Jeff Driscoll. And not that his backup was doing anything well either, but it just almost made you feel a little bit sorry for Florida, even though Missouri a week before was in a similar position. So I really, and I wrote this in my column about the game, it was like, it was a great win for Missouri because you only get 12 games and there's one in the victory column and they may need it. They probably will need it. But in terms of this being some sort of formula for success going forward, no, because you're just never going to get that generous opponent again, even this week against Vanderbilt, I don't think.
Yeah, I would agree.
So coming out of the game, Maty Mauk was 6 of 18 for 20 yards, which in a vacuum, everybody has a bad game, but it comes on the heels of the Georgia game, which was almost a Driscoll-like effort in terms of the turnovers in that game, a rough game against South Carolina, redeemed by some late heroics, but still a very rough game. So 3 games in a row where this offense has been terrible and his stats have been bad. A lot of people wondering, why do you not pull the plug, try someone else, either during these games or moving forward now? What would be your thoughts on that matter?
Well, I guess it comes down to what Gary Pinkel and Josh Henson want or expect out of their offense at this point. Like, when they look at Maty Mauk and his playmakers and the offensive line, do they look at a group and say, this is a group that can win us games? Or do they look at a group and say, this is a group that won't lose us games that we would have won anyway, if that makes any sense? Because, I mean, if they're looking at it as the former, then maybe you'd want to make some changes. If you want an offense that's actually going to win you games and you think that somebody like Eddie Prince or, I don't know, some wide receiver that has only gotten 10 snaps this year that we haven't seen anything out of yet can do that for you, then maybe you want to make a change. But if you're looking at the offense as just kind of something to eat up some clock and maybe every now and then score a touchdown, which isn't a very, flattering way to look at an offense, but some teams have to deal with that, then, I mean, if you look at it in that way, Maty Mauk hasn't lost them a game yet, really. I don't think he lost the Georgia game for them. I don't think they would have won if he had gone, 10 of 20 and not thrown any interceptions. He didn't lose the Indiana game for them, I don't think. So it seems as if the offense hasn't lost really either of the games that they've lost this year. So if that's fine with them, if they just kind of want an offense that won't cost them games, and I guess keep going like they're going. But if they want to aspire for something more and they think somebody can provide it, then I don't know, maybe time to make a change.
Well, you could argue that he lost the Georgia game for him. He turned it over 5 times.
Yeah, but I don't.
And they scored 0 points, and the defense played fairly well.
Yeah, but I don't think they were winning that game even with those 5 turnovers, because Georgia scored only 10 points off of those 5 turnovers.
Okay. Well, I would say this, that I think you have to look at it as, do we think that Maty Mauk is the quarterback of the future? If you do think that way, then I think you take steps to try to manage his confidence, not create something on the team where, you're splitting the locker room. What you really don't want, if you think he's your quarterback of the future, is to have him ending up looking like Jeff Driscoll did. They were switching around their quarterbacks, and whatever Jeff Driscoll ever once was, which was not ever a great quarterback, he is so. But if you watched him play, say, Kentucky earlier in the year, he wasn't that bad.
Right.
I think you have so shattered that kid's confidence that he'll never come back from it. I doubt. So you don't want that. You don't want to jack around with the quarterbacks if you're just strictly, we don't really think this other guy's better, but we're going to put him in anyway, and now, nobody believes in Maty Mauk anymore. I think, so if you think he is your quarterback of the future, then you could look at it like, we could have put Eddie Prince in the second half of that Georgia game, but we were getting killed, and we were going to lose that game anyway. We could have put Eddie Prince in the second half of the Florida game, but there was no way we were losing that game, so what's the point? And maybe you think we can win the Vanderbilt game with 2 hands tied behind our back, so why do we? And maybe throughout this whole period, somehow he's going to regain the quarterbacking ability that he had either last year or even at the beginning of this year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was doing fine, I thought, against like UCF and Toledo and even Indiana. I thought he had a pretty good game.
Yeah.
So it's not like you're talking about someone who's never done it. He's had his moments. They were always like sort of hard to interpret, but they were not. I mean, these last few have not been hard to interpret. They've been terrible.
Right.
But if you think, he's still got that in him, he can still be that player, then yeah, stick with him. But if you look at this roster and say, you know what, I'm not so sure we really do think he's the quarterback of the future. Maybe there's someone on that depth chart now, or maybe you're so smitten with Drew Lock and you're convinced he's going to be the guy next year, although he would be a true freshman, so I think that would be a rather dangerous assumption. But if you do not think he's the quarterback of the future, then I think you treat the quarterback position like you treat any other position, and we're going to, even if it's change for change's sake, nobody else could do worse, and so we're going to give someone else a shot, and just the fact of a change might spur on the offense a little bit and shake it out of whatever's ailing it. So I think that's what you look at. I think Gary Pinkel's position is, we do think he's the quarterback of the future. We're not thrilled with what he's doing, but we think he's the best chance we got, and we're not convinced Eddie Prince could do any better. So rather than take the chance of, dividing the locker room, ruining Mauk's confidence, we're going to ride with him. Now, I think if you end up in the fourth quarter against Vandy and it's a tie game and Mauk is 6 for 18 for 20 yards again, then I think you got to win the game. You can't be worrying about someone's confidence down the line, because I think the fourth game in a row where someone's that bad, you got to start worry about winning games now.
Right.
This game against Vanderbilt really is a game they have to win. Now, if you did want to make some sort of change, there's always the option. I guess Eddie Prince obviously is number 2. I don't know if we don't get to watch practice. From watching scrimmages, he really didn't ever jump out and grab me as someone that gives you a whole lot that Maty Mauk doesn't. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it seemed like him and Corbin Bergstresser were both just, I guess less complete Maty Mauks playing with the 2s against the 1 defense throughout both of the fall scrimmages. I mean, you've always been a Marvin Zanders man. So
I was going to get to that.
So I don't know if maybe, Marvin Zanders has a skill set that's different enough from the other 3 quarterbacks to where he would be a change of pace. I think that's another problem with the kind of Driscoll-Treon Harris thing, is they're using both of them the same way. It's not as if Jeff Driscoll's the pocket passer and Treon Harris is the wildcat kind of option quarterback scrambler or anything. They used him in the same way, and I feel like they'd use Mauk the same way, they'd use Prince the same way, they'd use Bergstresser. Now, I'm going to yield the floor to you on Marvin Zanders, since you're the world's foremost Marvin Zanders scholar, but I would think that he could provide a little bit of a different view than the other 3.
Well, here's my view on Marvin Zanders. If the new normal is that Maty Mauk is always going to complete 37% of his passes for 20 yards, and the knock on Marvin Zanders playing would be, and keep in mind Marvin Zanders is 4th string.
Right.
But if the reason that you don't play him is he doesn't really know the offense as well as the other guys, he's a pretty raw passer. I don't care how raw he is a passer, he could throw the ball left-handed and complete 33% of his passes. So if the new normal is completing 33% of your passes, he can do that, and he's a fantastic runner. And so now you can at least have a play that works, in that you could run the zone read and he could run it well. And even if he isn't the quarterback of the future, if you do think down the line that guy would be Drew Lock or whoever, you can always end up doing something else with Marvin Zanders. An athlete that good can do multiple things. So that would be my. You knew I was going to advocate for Marvin Zanders, and I just did. But and it's still, we're basically just halfway through the season. It's not so late to pull a redshirt if you think a guy can help you. Lastly. There's a very curious position Missouri is in now, because it's only lost 1 SEC game, has some very winnable games coming up. No one left on their schedule is a good team. So it's not ridiculous to say they could still win the SEC East title. It's also not ridiculous to say they could lose all these games, because if you gain 119 yards a game, you shouldn't ever win a game. Where does this fall now? What do you think is the future of this team?
I can't tell. I've guessed it wrong each of the last 3 weeks. I'm 0-3 in SEC play right now, trying to figure out whether Missouri is going to beat a team or not. I thought they'd lose to South Carolina, beat Georgia, and lose to Florida, and I was wrong all 3 times. But I mean, if you looked at it before the season, and just, I guess, divorcing it from all other context, said Missouri is going to get through Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina 2-1. I think anybody would have taken that. Gary Pinkel would have taken that. Anybody would have taken that. So, I mean, they're still in really good shape. And, I mean, the defense is playing really well right now. I mean, obviously Florida was a very terrible, discombobulated offense, but they made it worse on them. It wasn't like they were doing them any favors. And they played well against Georgia and South Carolina. So, I mean, Florida went 11-2 with a team like this in 2012, right? With the defense playing terribly, the offense, defense playing well, the offense playing terribly. Maybe a little better run attack with Florida in 2012. I think they had a 1,000-yard rusher, and I don't think anybody's getting there from Missouri. But I mean, the point is, like you said, the rest of these games. I mean, which of these games would you look at and say Missouri is definitely losing against blank? Like maybe earlier in the season you'd have said Texas A&M, but Alabama just housed them. They just beat them 59-0. And maybe you thought Kentucky or Tennessee was going to be a tougher test. Well, LSU just beat Kentucky by 38 points, and they only beat Florida by 3. And then Tennessee, obviously up against a good Ole Miss team, but they still got pretty much taken to the cleaners, against Ole Miss. So it's just, I guess, it's a weird year in that a very bad team can win the East. I mean, especially when you look at it, we assume that Georgia's the class of the East, and I think it is. but they've got Auburn left. Like Auburn's a really good team, whereas Missouri's best team left is Texas A&M, which is going through its own offensive identity crisis right now. So I mean, it's really difficult to read the rest of this season because, like you said, I mean, Vanderbilt's a probable win, but if Missouri gains 100 yards and doesn't get 6 turnovers, then how are they going to win that game? How are they going to win any game? So yeah, they're in a very advantageous position if they can just kind of figure out some of these offensive troubles, then maybe they'd have an even better chance, I would think.
Yeah, I think the Vanderbilt's one game that you can really mark and say they should definitely win that game. Beyond that, any team that can score 3 touchdowns is going to give Missouri a lot of trouble. I mean, if they keep playing the offense where they're playing, they're probably going to go 1-4 the rest of the way, even though they're not playing very good teams, because you just can't win. I mean, you're not going to get that many turnovers most of the time, and you're not going to get kick return touchdowns very often. So I think it's fix the offense, however you define that, whether it's simply get better or make changes, or you're probably going to go about 1-4. I mean, you can't gain in the 100-yard range and win. It happened once.
Yeah.
There's a reason that the statistic ESPN provided that teams that have held opponents under whatever it was 120 yards, only 2 have lost, and they were both Will Muschamp. You don't get to play Will Muschamp anymore. So.
And also, like Tom Orff found, the last time it happened in Missouri was in 1973, where they gained in the hundreds and won a game. So yeah, it comes around once every 40 years, right?
All right, so join us again next week when we'll discuss the Vanderbilt game and look forward to the following week's game against Kentucky.